Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and any issues related to those issues. A hearty shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Join the nation by hitting that subscribe button, and if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button and your membership options for citizenship will be presented to you. Today I want to continue on in my Reconstruction story, where I'm going through the year by year some of the things that I've learned to reconstruct in my life. I've told my deconversion story for 2023, a more complete version. It's long, and if you want to deep dive the whole deconversion process, it's a good one. I'll link it above my head. But also, I realized I think I want to talk about Reconstruction more and more on the channel. So this is my way of kind of introducing the ideas that I've learned in Reconstruction and reconstructing my life after faith. And I've been doing this. I've been out of the church since 2018, so that part of it's only been 5 years or so, working on 6, but I have not been a Christian for like 9, and 3 of those years I was in the pulpit, including 2 as an atheist. So when I look at Reconstruction, I've said that my Reconstruction kind of started there, but it was difficult because of the environment, and now I'm getting out of the environment. At the end of 2021, I had spent my first semester as a teacher. I had moved to Texas. I had, I'd lost my therapist. I had divorced my wife in September 21st was our divorce date, 2021. And I was starting a whole new life. I had my own apartment. A lot of you, I was doing videos on the channel at that time. At the end of that, just having a presence in Texas, though, is difficult because I was a teacher. There's a lot of very high cultural pressure to be, religious in the South. The Bible Belt is a real thing. I really felt, to be honest, to describe it, I felt like I'd stepped back in time 30 years here in Michigan, because religion was strong across the entire country in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the 80s. And so I felt like I felt like I stepped back into the 80s as far as, cultural influence of religion when I went into the South. But the Bible Belt's still the Bible Belt. Is it strong as it used to be? Probably not. There's definitely some cosmopolitan, open attitudes in the city. But for me, I tried several times to connect to an atheist community at that time. I did, meet with people, but the atheist communities that got together were really very, very small. More of like a small group that would meet on occasion and just talk about the things they were facing. And, I came home for Christmas in 2021, enjoyed it, had a really good Christmas, but I was very homesick. I noticed the homesickness started to grow every time I came home, because I felt more at home. I felt more relaxed when I was back home. And I couldn't understand why. At the time, I didn't know about the possibility of being autistic and hypersensitivity. I always interpreted these things as different, like I'm just a different person, I'm just very introverted, I just don't understand social stuff, I don't know why all this other stuff bothers me, but it does bother me, and I just never understood it. It's a recent revelation that I'll talk about in my next video in 2023, but this is where I was really struggling, and I went back and started 2022 as a teacher. And this would be the first and only year that I would have full, from beginning to end, as a teacher, living the teacher lifestyle. And I think the real problem was not the first year teaching. I got past that second semester pretty well. formed a lot of good relationships. I even had one girl that I really helped out a lot, so much to the point that the next year, the end of that year, she came back and stopped and saw me every day to talk to me, and because she still needed to talk to her old teacher for 5 minutes just to kind of, keep her head level. And so, from a personal level, I felt like I got through to a lot of the kids on a life level. I was, however, that whole year, both semesters, the end of the one year, the beginning of the other, I really felt inadequate in teaching the subject I was teaching. And it's one of my criticisms of public education as far as what they do with their teachers. A lot of it is, climbing the ladder, getting to a place of seniority where you can pick the classes that you want to pick. The problem is a lot of times the classes that, like a social studies major teacher wants to teach, they're not as good as an expert as somebody coming in with alternative certification. And that was one of my beefs, because my degree is in political science. I have a minor in economics, which means I would be perfect for any government economic classes. But in high school, those classes are occupied by the teachers that have been there the longest. They want to deal with seniors, juniors, and seniors because they're easier to deal with than squirrely freshmen. And so I ended up finding myself in this position where I didn't really feel comfortable with the subject matter I was teaching, and I didn't feel very effective at it for that reason. And I voiced that complaint and wanted to move into more of a world history role, but I didn't get it that summer. And that summer was very interesting because I came home to Michigan again. My original intent was to camp out and all this other stuff, but inflation had grown so much, I was very worried about having enough money to get back to Texas and start my second year. And so it was like I kept it on the down low and watched my pennies really hard. Because my original intent was to stay at a couple of Michigan campgrounds and camp out and live out of my, my Jeep and do some hiking and things like that. But it just never materialized because of the money situation. And so, camped out in my daughter's backyard most of the time, or went and stayed with my son for a week or two, and then came back. And then I went back to Texas, and that was a very hard trip for me. I had an awful time motivating myself to go back to Texas, but I dove back into my second year of teaching that semester, and everything was different. And within a month, the school, the specialist, and the whole thing, and this had, I'd spent part of my summer, like coming up with plans of what I was going to do different the next year. Well, as soon as I started to implement them, and the next thing I know, the specialist is coming along and just saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, you need to do this instead. And it was really became a dictatorial kind of thing where she was trying to push what she wanted to do on all the rest of us. And it really, the whole hive mind, not allowing you to teach your own style, things like that, just became a real big thing for me. And now I realize, because of the autism, it's like I don't like change unless I initiate the change. And so it was really becoming much more stressful than it needed to be. I had one friend there who, within 2 weeks, basically resigned because they were trying to get rid of him because he had caused problems the year before just by trying to be honest about it. And so he left after a couple weeks because they had dumped like tons of special ed kids into his class, and he's not qualified for that. Okay, and then the specialist that was supposed to work with him resigned, and they didn't replace them. And he's like, they're not going to until I resign. So he left. So that friendship anchor at work disappeared. And so this whole last semester of that year just became really just a mess. And so I was getting more and more stressed out. And one of the things that happened, a couple weeks before I went home for Christmas, I was in class and I was teaching, and all of a sudden I started to black out. Now I didn't completely black out. I caught myself, and I woke up, just in time, steadied myself, and then went back on with the day. didn't think much of it. I said, well, that's weird. That's never happened before. Maybe it's the stress or whatever. And then a couple days later, I'm walking down the hall, and all of a sudden I start to veer to the left, and I'm trying to aim straight ahead, but I'm veering to the left and almost ran into the wall. And I'm like, well, that's just strange. What's going on? And so I spent some time at home at Christmas, and that was a real homesickness moment. I was really bad that Christmas of 2022. And I'll get more into this story, but long story short, I was beginning to feel the effects of hypersensitivity overwhelming my nervous system, along with all this other stuff that was going on. I really, at this point, felt like a stranger in a strange land. It's one of my favorite books by Robert Heinlein, but it's also very much how I felt in 2022. Is I felt like, where do I belong? Where am I at? And this career of being a teacher just did not seem to fit me very well. And I was in an environment that I felt was very hostile to atheists, definitely very hostile to atheists, so I wasn't very openly an atheist. I was doing a few videos on the channel. Some of you can remember those years. The videos were very sparse, and then eventually not at all. I was just way too overwhelmed with a lot of things. And Texas just has this different environment. It's hotter. It's always bright. To hypersensitivity issues. Houston, Texas has a particular smell to it. Some of you have asked about that, but it's a combination of the ocean, petroleum, car exhaust. There are a lot of good food smells, and because there's all kinds of food trucks, and if you're in the right spot, you can smell those, and those are really positive. But most of the time, I just felt like, nah. I hardly ventured out of my apartment when I was working. I did go to the Texas Renaissance Festival a few times, enjoyed it every time because I got out of the city, got back to a place where there's like a legit forest, and walked around, and I felt more at home. And maybe if I had done things differently, like I'd gone to a more country school, but then the money's not as good. So it's like, I'm working in this inner city school, and we had a lot of kids that English language learners, all this other stuff, plus, at-risk factors in most of them. And I was having a good time with the kids. I absolutely enjoyed the freshmen I was working with. Freshmen are squirrely and they're very stressful, but, if you get through to them, they're some of the best, most loyal kids you'll have. All right, and it was just fun. I had a lot of fun doing that. It was all the rest of it, being in public education, that I hated because, I don't know. I wanted to teach my way, and I'm just not very adaptable anymore. And there's just a lot of criticism there, I suppose, of me. And I just suddenly realized that this career didn't fit, and it was beginning to wear me out, and I didn't know why. The blackout started, and I went home for Christmas. And I'll get to what the ultimate aftermath of all this is next time when I talk about 2023. But this year of being an educator, I was focused in my deconversion on survival. I was more of it in a survival mode because I didn't have my therapist. And I know on my channel here I advocate for therapy a lot, and there's a reason for that. And this not having my therapist for a year and a half, I would have to say made it, twice as stressful as it needed to be. If I'd had somebody to talk to every couple of weeks about all this, I might have made it through a lot better. And my therapist said when I got back, she says, I suspected that you might be autistic, but I was still looking for a few more things. And I didn't want to mention it I didn't want to go down that path until we were ready to do so. And so it was like, I didn't know what the enemy was or what I was dealing with, what the condition was. I guess I shouldn't call autism an enemy. It's more of a condition. It's just the way you are. You're wired differently, than most neurotypical people. It's why I talk about neurology a lot, because neurology to me has a big effect on who we are and how we approach life. And we're getting to a point, for me at least, where I was like, there's something wrong. I'm blacking out. I'm losing bodily control of my functions here. And I'd be at home, and I would literally, once I got all my schoolwork done and all my stuff done and my lesson plan for the next day, I would literally just sit there and do nothing, because I was so exhausted. And everything seemed to be more work than it was. And so going home for Christmas was just this intense relief, And, it was just, I really felt like a stranger in a strange land. Now, the one positive deconvertive element that came out of this is I started looking at Stoic philosophy a lot more and looking at my overall philosophy of life. And I began to, do research in this, and Stoicism really kind of meshes with my personality really well. I've developed, I don't, since leaving the faith, I don't have this attitude when I look at ideological systems of, is this right or is this wrong? Okay. I look at it as, what value does it have? And in the case of philosophy, okay, for those of you deconverting and trying to come up with a new moral philosophy or a new philosophy of how to live life without God, there's plenty of them out there. Okay. It's just, which one meshes better with who you are and which one has the most utility is the question. For me, Stoicism works because I have this attitude of, I got to focus on the things I can control, ignore the things I can't control, have a better attitude about people being critical of me, listening but not letting it overwhelm my emotions. Things like that became very helpful to me. But it also kind of cemented, I think, my attitude about not really liking what I was doing, because I began to realize there was a lot of things that were outside of my control in teaching that I couldn't accept. And it was starting to stress me out. But at the time that I left for home in 2022 for Christmas, my thoughts were, I'm going to finish out my year contract, and then I'm going to either find a new school or I'm going to move back to Michigan and transfer my credentials or something to that effect. And the thing is, I hadn't really finished my credentials in Texas. I had like 3 classes left, and I was kind of on borrowed time with that. And the self-sabotage was very real in this because, when you're under stress, you often overlook things that you should do. And in my case, the autism causes me, when I get overly stressed, to things that are going to really super stress me out, I ignore. And it becomes a self-sabotage issue, which is another good reason to talk to your therapist about making sure you're getting everything done that you need to get done. And so that's kind of where I was. I was a stranger in a strange land. I didn't feel right. If I went to my Norse, pagan, Viking roots, I was thinking of my time in Texas as a raid. I'm getting on the ship, raiding the coast, and then I'm coming home. And my thoughts about Michigan being my home just intensified. That this is the place for me, my home, my hometown. I don't mind it as much as I used to of being here. And I don't know. It was just a really stressful year. And I was putting a lot of burden on my nervous system, and it was starting to have physiological effects. And so one of the things I did when I first blacked out is I contacted a doctor friend of mine, and he's retired, and and wishes to remain nameless, by the way. So because I think he's still a believer, but I contacted him with my symptoms, and he said, well, if you're not having these physical symptoms, he says, I don't think it's physical, it might be psychosomatic. And so that's when I started talking to the counselor at the school a little bit, and then, didn't have a lot of conversations with her, but the conversations we had were like, yeah, I think it's the stress getting to you, and it's causing you to have these physical effects, and it wasn't getting any better, is my point. And, the depression was really, really, really high at that point. So, That's kind of what 2022 was, this melees of being a stranger in a strange land. I have a lot of thoughts about Texas and public education and Houston and a few things like that. There were a few things that I definitely enjoyed. The Texas Renaissance Festival is one of the best I've ever been to, probably the best. Really enjoyed listening to, all the live performances and, watching the jousting and, all the stuff that you would expect in a Renaissance Festival. And I did go in costume one time. I walked around as a medieval wizard for a while, and I did that. And I still have my staff, my staff over there in the corner I bought at the Renaissance Festival. And it was a very enjoyable days for me, like a real intense relief days. But they were so few and far between, and the stress level and living in a religious environment. Maybe I'm overblowing a lot of that, but probably the hypersensitivity and the autism didn't help in overblowing some of the issues. What I did realize at this point is that I was not in the right place where I needed to be, and for my own sake. This wasn't a religious decision, and from a deconversion standpoint, you can analyze the situation and realize it's a problem and you don't need some religiosity. Before I would have said, well, God is moving me back, or, it's like, and offer up God as an excuse. I can't do that anymore. Okay, I can only face my demons and face my issues. And one of the biggest deconversion issues you can face at any point is that you are responsible for your actions, taking responsibility for yourself. But at the same time, there's realizing there's a lot of things that are out of your control. And so that's kind of where I was at the end of 2022. I think the real meat of this part of the story starts next year in 2023, which is a little closer to now. So, but it's, take away from my story at this point, because that's why I do my Reconstruction Story, is the hope that you can have is even when you make a mistake, you can recover from it. That life isn't this thing that you're locked into. Getting rid of the fatalistic mentality, atheism. Some atheists say that we're fated. Even if we are, we don't know it. So we still have to move on. And so from my perspective, it was a year where a lot of my problems, because I didn't have the religious environment in my life so much other than the culture around me, suddenly some problems surfaced that I didn't know existed, but they were always there. And it allowed me to suddenly realize, okay, I have a problem now. What do I do about it? And I went into Christmas of 2022 and the new year asking that question. What do I do about this? I have these problems I didn't know I had before, or I was giving them religious context to avoid them. What do I do with them? Okay. And I think when you deconvert, you're in a better position to ask those types of questions and be very realistic about the answer. But I'll get more into that next time when I talk about 2023, because it's a big pivotal year for me in a lot of ways, for the channel and for everything else. But I'm just laying out right now, stranger in a strange land, having a real hard time, just not enjoying life at that point, and just, trying to figure out different ways to go forward. But, I'll leave it there. Thanks once again for stopping by. I appreciate every single one of you. The channel's really growing right now, and I'm just overwhelmed a little bit, and I'll talk more about that on Saturday. But just, keep doing what you do. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around, and then it's over. So make sure you take all your time, your money, your talent, and use it to build yourself up, to build up the people around you, and make this a better world. And don't waste it on the trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. I speak from experience. And as always, live your best life. And, as always, thanks for stopping by. And I'll catch you next time.